I hope not either.
It used to be
All right. Good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock. We've got a this is what I printed. But I see what we have here. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call the Public Safety and Human Relations Commission, our regular meeting for January 9th, 2023. Happy New Year, everybody. 6 p.m. All right, and let's go ahead and we're going to start with our Pledge of Allegiance. And Commissioner Guzman, would you do us the honors?
I'll be happy.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Please, everyone, place your right hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We're going to have our invocation. Who do we have? Going to do the invocation.
We don't have anybody designated,
Okay.
so my idea was to pass it around.
Okay. All right. Is anybody? It looks like it's going to be you again, Commissioner Tombo.
All right. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we come before you in Jesus' name. We ask you to bless this meeting, Father God. Let us be a blessing to the community. Let us be a blessing to the departments that we represent. Father God, we lift up all of our electeds. Pray that you would give them wisdom and knowledge. Give us wisdom and knowledge as well, Father God, as we go through this meeting. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Roll call, Mrs. Cervantes. Ms. Sandoval.
Commissioner Guzman,
Present.
Commissioner Kelly,
Here.
Commissioner Walters,
Present.
Commissioner Tomba,
Present?
Commissioner Roberson advised that he would not be here today. Vice Chair Taylor,
Present.
Commissioner Cervantes,
Here.
Commissioner Carrillo,
Present.
and Chairman Elliott.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any public comments for items listed and not listed on the agenda?
I don't have any.
All right, we are going to, let me read the, yeah. So, we're going to do approval of the draft minutes, approve the minutes of the December 12th, 2022 Public Safety and Human Relations Commission, the regular meeting. Do I have a motion?
Move.
A second? Or, Commissioner Elliott, do I have a second?
Second, Tomba?
Second, Commissioner Tombach. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We're going to just put the presentation pause right there. We're going to go ahead and move to, which one is that one? It is the election of the officers under new business number 4, election of the officers for position of chair and vice chair for 2023. I'll go ahead and I'm going to give it over to Commissioner Elliott to handle this part.
Okay. Are there nominations for chair? I nominate Commissioner Taylor.
I'd like to nominate Jesse.
Nominate Carrillo.
Yes.
Are there any others? Thank you. Nominations are closed. Those in favor of Commissioner Taylor, raise your hands. 2, 3, 4, 5. Those in favor of Commissioner Carrillo? 1, 2. Okay, congratulations, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Nominations for Vice Chair are open.
I nominate Commissioner Elliott.
I decline. I nominate Carrillo. Anyone else? I nominate Commissioner Kelly. Any others? All right. Those in favor of Carrillo, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Congratulations, Mr. Vice Chair. So we have a new chairman and vice chairman, Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Carrillo. Congratulations. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. All right. So,
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Can I ask who made the nomination for Carrillo?
Cervantes.
Cervantes. Okay, thank you. Just for the record.
Okay, is that it?
Thank you.
All right, nominations are closed. And so now we'll go back up to the presentation for our local roadway safety plan, LRSP presentation by the KOA corporate consultant. All right.
Yeah. As you know, I'm the city traffic engineer. My name is Zami Yakshay. Good evening, commissioners. We're here to consider staff report, receive public input, provide recommendation to the mayor and city council, adopt the resolution in your packet, accepting the local roadway safety plan. If you recall, we did a presentation about maybe a year and 2 months, in awarding the contract to KOA. KOA came and did a presentation on how we're going to approach the project. We're done. So basically, this is the final presentation to the commission by KOA, and I'll hand it over to Jonathan Rasmussen to do the presentation.
Okay.
Good evening, Commission, Madam Chairwoman, congratulations, Vice Chair as well, and Commission members. Thanks for giving me a chance to present today. I'm just going to briefly talk about what KOA went in our approach to the local roadway safety plan, the type of outreach we did, how we analyzed collisions, developed projects, and came up with a set of recommendations for the Public Works team, as well as submitting an application for a highway safety improvement grant to the state of California. So I believe you all have copies of the slide deck in front of you. Do you think, Suzanne, we'll have a chance to get it up to show the corridor?
Do you have a thumb drive or how?
No, it's the one I sent to you. That's fine. If
Oh,
they have
I'm
it-
sorry.
If not, we've got
We all have
I put
it.
in the
We all
packet.
have it.
copies.
I
Great.
see.
Okay, we just
The
had
only
one piece where it was a little easier to see the project we submitted, but we can also share them in the zonebeach.com, so that can be shared with the commission as well if folks are interested. So I'll just kind of walk through this and say, we'll be moving to the next slide for everyone's information. So moving on to the second slide of the presentation, the purpose and goals was really to develop a systemic approach to addressing transportation safety in the city of San Bernardino. The important thing was it was data-driven and focused on collision history and what was feasible and constructible. We focused on what are known as the 4 E's of transportation safety, and that's engineering, which Public Works takes care of, but also education, enforcement, and emergency services. We conducted outreach with a variety of stakeholders within the city and county, and even going to some of the state agencies. And we developed projects both for HSIP funding in particular, which has a very specific set of requirements, but we also tried to make sure that the projects could apply for funding in other programs and were feasible and constructible. We also had continuous documentation throughout the entire process. Zom let me know that he forwarded the entire report to you, which you can read at your leisure. I'm happy to answer questions about that as well. And that'll also allow it to be updated in the future, so this process can be continuous and it's not just a point in time. Moving on to the next slide. So we took a look at all of the related city planning projects and public works projects that were under construction. We really focused on consistency with the plans. So we looked at previous safety planning efforts. We looked at the recently approved active transportation plan. The city's undergoing a general plan update to the circulation element, a downtown specific plan, truck route updates. There's a couple other recently completed plans as well. And we looked at all of those. We didn't want to be in conflict with other efforts. The other nice thing is that as the LRSP is regularly updated, it will remain relevant to these planning efforts in the future when they're updated. So moving on to the next slide. This is a snapshot of all of the collisions in the city between 2016 and 2020. There were 8,855 collisions in a 5-year period. And there were 311 fatal or severe collisions. And we refer to those as KSIs, both in the report and I will do in this presentation as well. Actually, those collisions are down overall. They're down 11% between 2016 and 2020. That does represent the start of the COVID pandemic. And so while a lot of other cities actually experienced an increase in collisions and fatal and severe collisions, San Bernardino actually experienced a slight decrease. I would say it could rebound. It would just be important to continue to monitor that in the future. Automobile collisions, of course, are the most common just because that's the primary mode of transportation for most people on the road. But pedestrian and motorcycle collisions had a particularly high risk relative to that. You're more likely to be killed or severely injured if you're walking or riding a motorcycle on city streets. And that's also just generally true on roadways in this country overall. Some of the hot spots in particular, you can see a little bit on the map where both KSI collisions and just high numbers of collisions occurred were along Highland. That was a very prominent corridor in all of this, as well as Baseline, 5th Street, and 9th Street. We also saw some hot spots on Waterman, Mount Vernon, and Tippecanoe, but these are consistent with very high traffic volumes on those roadways, so where you have more vehicles driving, more commercial activity, more people, there tends to be more collisions as well. The city also generally had lower collision rates than the county and several other cities in similar sizes, which was a note. Being the largest city, it's usually the opposite when compared to the county. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to jump really quickly into stakeholder engagement. We had a lot of dialogue with the police department, school districts, neighborhood associations. We also had responses from SBCTA, which is the County Transportation Authority, Caltrans, and even County Fire as well. Most of them have ongoing and sort of consistent education and outreach programs, and we're really just recommending continuing those because they complement the engineering work that the city's already doing. We also asked about any specific locations of concern and then plotted those against the collision history to see if there was any overlap. There tended not to be a fair amount of overlap. It really, I think, was not anecdotal, but generally individuals experienced kind of a point in time issue, and that really resonated with them, and they remember it, and they brought that towards our outreach. Fortunately, there was not any sort of consistent overlap between things like the city's 311 reporting system, the services request system, I believe it's called, but it may indicate there are some areas where maybe speed enforcement or DUI checkpoints might be worth considering in the future, sort of correlating that data with future enforcement efforts. Moving on to the next slide. The other thing is we developed 5 safety emphasis areas that were the focus of the LRSP. We were looking at specific types of collisions, and those were pedestrian safety, just given the amount of risk associated with walking if you're in a collision with a vehicle. We looked at unsafe speed. This is a very consistent contributor to killed and severe injury collisions in the city. Intersection safety, this is just generally true where you have streets crossing. There are numerous conflicts between people walking, people turning, people driving generally, so we focus on intersection safety. The city did have not a very high, but an elevated number of DUIs citywide when compared to the county, and so we noted that as something to focus on. Again, there's programming in place already that's enforcing this, and we just sort of encourage continuing it. And the last one was school collisions. Fortunately, the city didn't have a huge number of school collisions, but because it's an especially vulnerable population, we'd like to focus on that and make sure that any countermeasures or enforcement or education in place continues, for the safety of children in the city. So I'm going to dive a little bit into those really quickly. If there's any questions about the specific area, I'm happy to field those as I present. Moving on to the next slide, pedestrian safety. Again, they're most at risk in collisions. The city has a lot of long blocks and wide streets. That's a long crossing distance for people to go across. And so if there's a vehicle turning or going through a light, there's a good chance they could be struck. They're only 6% of total collisions citywide, but they're 33% of fatal or severe injury collisions. And that's that elevated risk I'm talking about. You're 5 times more likely to be killed or severely injured if you're walking versus using any other mode. So definitely worth noting. Again, with the city's specific plan as development continues downtown, pedestrian supportive infrastructure would be important to include. Most of those high frequencies are on major arterials, which is, again, to be expected. That's where commercial activity, high volumes of traffic are. But other notable hotspots were along Kendall Drive, which was actually the project we submitted for in the HSIP program, as well as Del Rosa Drive, and at the south end of Tippecanoe, where there's a lot of commercial development happening, a lot of people walking, and a lot of cars going in and out of that area. Moving on to the next slide, unsafe speed. This is a difficult one to address because there's no single engineering countermeasure or piece of specific infrastructure you can put in place to force people to drive more slowly. You can put up a sign, they can ignore it. So it's really a combination of numerous traffic calming measures, continuous education, outreach and enforcement campaigns, and just really trying to bring the attention to the public that driving above the speed limit is dangerous to them, it's dangerous to others, and people should really be considerate when driving. There's no real silver bullet in this case. There are also, the majority of them do occur at intersections. Again, there's a lot of conflict there, and are primarily rear-end collisions, which also have the potential to injure or kill people much more than others. There is also a policy opportunity around speed to reduce speed limits, not citywide, but on select arterials, and that's through AB 43 legislation that was recently passed at the state level. It does require an engineering study and some additional work. You can't just unilaterally lower speeds, but there are some good opportunities, we think, in the city of San Bernardino to use that legislation to your advantage. Moving on to the next one, intersection safety. So these represented 85% of all of the collisions citywide, and you combine that with unsafe speed as a contributing factor, and then congestion along these arterials, and you have a recipe for vehicles and people being involved in traffic collisions. It's also important that signalized intersections be reviewed because some of these conflicts are specifically for left-turning vehicles or right-turning vehicles or with a particular pedestrian crossing location. So it's not just the intersection as a whole, but sometimes it's a specific movement or activity happening there. Sometimes it's even related to the land use. You tend to see this around gas stations. They've got usually 4 driveways right up next to an intersection where people are turning, and so there's difficulty with sight lines, there's elevated risk there. So improving visibility is important. The other one is separating modes, doing things like protected left turn, signal phasing, giving pedestrians a head start through what's called a leading pedestrian interval. They get 3-4 seconds to get out of the intersection before there's a green light. And other kind of minor tweaks can improve safety in intersections. So that's definitely worth doing as well. Moving on to the next slide, again, driving under the influence. This is another one that there's not a specific engineering countermeasure. You can't put a sign up and people aren't required to obey it, but again, it's a combination of a lot of enforcement, a lot of education and outreach. DUIs are actually trending down citywide, statewide, and nationally, so this is a problem that is decreasing, but it's one that is still, I think, poignant and visible in people's experience. You remember a DUI collision, whether you were the one that was hit or you were ticketed when it happened. People remember it, and it has a big impact. There are more than 7% of all the KSI collisions in the city, so it's not a small number. Again, they're primarily along major commercial corridors, where you tend to expect to see this. We also see it at highway ramps where people are moving from a high-speed environment to a low-speed environment on local streets, and they're not regulating their speed in time or well enough. And so combined with drinking and driving, they will end up in collisions. There's a heavy concentration just north of downtown, actually fairly low numbers we're seeing downtown, which was unusual for most urban environments. And then also along Mount Vernon and Kendall Drive and Little Mountain. That may be related to some of the student housing and the fact that there's a university up there. We did see kind of a trend of younger people being involved in traffic collisions generally. But that's not necessarily the only contributing factor. Those are also major cut-through routes between large traffic generators within the city, right? You've got downtown, you've got the rail yards and the industrial to the west side of the city, you've got the college, and then you've got residential neighborhoods between that. So moving on to the next slide, this last one, school collisions. Again, while fortunately these were pretty low numbers, and we used a qualifier of within 750 feet of a school, qualified it as a school collision. They were low, there were only 515 over the course of 5 years. Only 50 involved people walking or biking, and that's the mode that a lot of kids will take when they're getting to school, especially if it's their local school. They're more vulnerable that way. only 44 involved individuals that were 18 or younger out of the entire 515. So fortunately, a lot of children as the sort of primary victim in the collision are not being involved, right? One is too many, but only 44 out of 515. There were really high concentrations along Baseline, right next to the 215, and at 5th and Medical Center Drive. Those were sort of two notable clusters. There are large numbers of schools there as well, but that's also an area that we generally saw a concentration of collisions regardless of the type. So I think that's more of just like a problem area for traffic safety generally. I see you're nodding. Sounds like it's a well-known quantity, I think, to the commission. Generally, just enhanced pedestrian infrastructure is one of the best ways to mitigate school collisions. Rapid rectangular flashing beacons, it's a type of crossing that's got a little bit more visibility than your own traditional crosswalk. Curb bulb outs to shorten the crossing distance. Children or parents with kids walk slower than a full-grown adult, and so you want to give them a little bit less distance to cross over. Complete sidewalk connections, and then combining that with a set of clear pickup and drop-off guidance for parents really has the best effect towards school safety. One of the other projects we developed was along 9th Street, just east of Waterman, where there's an elementary school and a middle school there. And we saw some opportunity to improve school safety along what was really a high-speed minor arterial. And just generally implementing traffic calming around schools. I think at that same location on Olive, there's a really great set of traffic calming behind the school, which was clearly being used as a pickup and drop-off zone. And we saw that it did have an effect on collisions in that area. So that's the 5 safety emphasis areas. I'm going to move really quickly to the next slide. This might be a little tough to see on a sheet of paper, but we had 14 locations where we recommended engineering countermeasures. These were locations where there was both a clear pattern of collisions or a recognized safety issue. So we didn't just want to pick and choose from projects that the city already had in place but wouldn't necessarily address a safety issue. We wanted to find the areas where those issues were and then develop projects around that. We also wanted to make sure that we used recommended countermeasures and engineering measures that were eligible for funding. We didn't want to recommend something that couldn't be paid for with outside funding if the need for grants arose. And the other thing we tried to do was not conflict with existing projects. The city had $10 million in HSIP funding from a previous round, and they had a lot of really good projects on a lot of the major arterials. That's why a lot of these recommendations are not on streets like Baseline, Highland, Waterman. Those corridors already have projects in progress, and we didn't want to sort of duplicate the effort that the city had already gone through to address safety. And most of them were around addressing speed control, intersection safety. So kind of covering the areas we were looking at as well. We also really wanted to focus on feasibility. We didn't want to recommend something that couldn't be built, and we wanted to make sure it was something that the city could deliver within the confines of sort of a grant program, right? They give you a limited amount of time to spend the money. So one of the projects we recommended that I will go over later was the one up on Kendall, but there were also notable projects on 9th Street, Medical Center Drive in Cajon, and a few others that you can see in the map there. And all of those are more clearly documented in the full report. We list the types of collision issues, the specific types of countermeasures, and how they would address safety at those locations. I'm not going to go over all 14. Moving on to the next slide. So this is just kind of a quick list of those same projects as well. We list the countermeasures also. That's kind of just a reference number, but the thing I want to draw the Commission's attention to is the benefit-cost ratio. This is a good way to prioritize projects. What are the benefits of collision reduction that you're going to get, and how much does the project cost? It's a really simple metric you can use to figure out which projects sort of rise to the level of most important, but also are going to be able to be funded as well. Generally, we had a lot of intersection improvements recommended there, things like signal upgrades, signal timing improvements, leading pedestrian intervals. We also focused on enhanced pedestrian infrastructure, so adding things like high visibility crosswalks, rapid rectangular flashing beacons, curb bulb outs, things that again just shorten that crossing distance along a lot of the arterials in the city. So a lot of this can also be rolled into existing maintenance activity. This doesn't necessarily need to be a brand new project. If it's something like using red curb to clear the sight line at a corner so you can see turning vehicles or oncoming traffic, that's something that the city can also do within its own maintenance program, or go for maintenance specific grant funding, which is limited, but it is out there. So again, just want to focus on that benefit cost ratio. Some of them are extremely high, some of them are extremely low, but what really matters is, does it make them competitive for grant funding, and are they worth going after, given their chances of being awarded. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to really quickly go over some of these program funding sources for the different safety emphasis areas. That's the other half of the LRSP, which is the non-engineering county measures. We can build stuff all day, but a lot of this work is already being done by different departments in the city. So many of the non-engineering programs, they're already in place. They have really well-established best practices and precedents. A lot of them are funded through the Office of Traffic Safety. That's a state office. The police department has a really good record of going after that funding and winning it and implementing those programs. So a lot of this we just recommend continuing, and expanding where possible. Typically implementing these things is limited by agency capacity, available funding. Sometimes you can't find the right person to partner with for an outreach campaign or an education program. One of the nice things too is for driving under the influence, these are trending downwards, right? So while that doesn't mean you can stop implementing those programs, it shows that they are working and they're successful. And so to continue them, we think is what we recommend moving forward with, so you can maintain that downward trend. Moving on to the next slide, unsafe speed. This is a tough one, like I mentioned before. There's no silver bullet. So besides some of this outreach campaigns that you can put up PSAs, you can tell young drivers to drive safely, and then you can do things like speed traps and speeding enforcement through the police department. There's a couple other policy mechanisms that take a little longer. Things like supporting changes to the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, a mouthful, called the MUTCD, but that regulates what you can and can't install as a traffic safety device in the country generally, and then within the state of California. So there are changes happening to that at the national level, and the city can look into that, see what types of changes would best support them, and then sort of support that as a policy priority moving forward. It's a little bit in the weeds, but it is an important one because it really tells you what you can and can't install, regardless of what it would do for safety in the city. The other thing is to incorporate some of these speed reducing components when a new development is coming in, when someone files for a permit, they want to make a change to access or something connecting to the street network, to make sure that that's put together in such a way that it promotes safe speeds, right? You're not making it easy for someone to peel out of a driveway at 45 miles an hour. They should have to proceed safely and according to the law. Like I mentioned before, we also do recommend looking at the city kind of across the board and looking at potential to implement AB 43 to lower some of those speed limits. It's incremental. It's only about 5 miles per hour, but you're legally allowed to move the speed limit downward rather than upward. So this is something that's pretty new for California, and other states are probably going to follow suit. And the police department, again, like I mentioned, you have a really consistent record on getting OTS funding and using that for things like the safety campaigns, enforcement. So just continue to do that. That OTS funding is also available to other city departments, and it's not seen as competitive if a different city department is applying for it. A public health department, a community development department can also apply for that and do their own education campaigns as well. Even school districts can apply for that also, actually, so you can partner with the school district. The last one, pedestrian and bicycle safety. Again, this is a lot of education and outreach, having classes in schools for kids to learn how to ride a bike properly, how to walk to school safety. You can do a program, what's called a bike train or a walking bus, where groups of kids will get together at a school and actually walk together in a group. There is safety in numbers, and so some programs like that. You can also implement what's called transportation demand management. And what that is that you set out some programs and policies so that people are encouraged to do things like take the bus, walk, bike, maybe telecommute 1 or 2 days a week, and you can offer incentives like free bus passes, paying them back for their parking space, etc. Moving on to the next slide, the last one, sorry, I know this is taking a bit of time, is school collisions. So one of the biggest things here is to keep local, besides the policies listed, is to keep local safe routes to school plans up to date. School traffic patterns change over time, new schools are built, new facilities are updated, and so you want to make sure that kids can access the school safely no matter what. I think it's important to reach out to schools to make sure that you're in touch with what their issues are. I think we had no problem getting in touch with the districts and working with Public Works, and so just to continue to do that, working with school safety officers, if the districts have a kind of safety operations need at the district level, to also stay in touch with them. And also support any kind of traffic diversion if you've got a special pickup and drop-off plan for that school, or maybe you're closing traffic on a street, or maybe restricting right turns or left turns, so people trying to pick up their children can't do something that's unsafe for other people in the street. That's another opportunity as well. Moving on to the next slide, so I'm going to specifically talk about the HSIP program now. So this is a set of funding that's specifically dedicated at the federal level, comes down to the states, and is applied to Caltrans. And so it's specifically focused on roadway and highway safety. So we put in the last cycle, there were 429 applications submitted across the state. This is a very competitive program. The average award, the average award was about $800,000. This particular project on Kendall Avenue, we recommended, you can see the improvements there, we recommended 1.7 mile class 4 cycle track, so a protected bike lane. We recommended installing a new traffic signal at the intersection of Kendall Drive and Lakewood Drive. If you're familiar with that, that's a crossing that's completely unprotected. It had limited lighting. There is a crosswalk striped, but it's not in great shape, and it's a 45-mile-per-hour roadway going down a hill. So to really kind of take that very long 2-mile segment and break it up with a new traffic signal, it'll control speed along that segment. It's also an access path for toward the school. So kids crossing there will be able to cross more safely because traffic will be stopped as opposed to them having to run across the street. We made a bunch of pedestrian crossing upgrades that we recommended. We had a couple other elements that would reduce turning conflict, so people turning in and out of their homes on that street, there is residential on the south side of it, aren't going to have to just sort of Hail Mary out in traffic, but there's a dedicated place for them to wait when they're turning. And then there's a short section with no sidewalks to create a continuous pedestrian path. We recommended adding a short section of sidewalk. We don't know yet if it's been awarded. That award is typically announced between February and March. But we had a decent benefit cost ratio, and so we're hoping to hear good news about that. If not, it's a good project that can be very quickly pivoted to other funding programs at the local level through agencies like SCAG or through the county, at the state level, back to Caltrans for other funding programs, and then for other new programs at the federal level. The new infrastructure bill has put a lot of safety funding out on the table that's much easier for local agencies to apply for and not as difficult as your typical program. And just the next slide is just a map of where that project is at. It's also included in the city's recent active transportation plan, and it'll basically create a high quality connection, one, just improving safety on Kendall, but also connecting the campus to 40th Street, kind of calm traffic that's going down to go through the East Street sort of dogleg curve and come out and come down into downtown. And it'll also connect to other businesses that are on the south side of the corridor. And again, it's multimodal, right? So it's safe for everyone traveling the corridor, not just people driving. That last slide, unfortunately, was going to be kind of a mini preview of the project. We were just going to sort of scroll along the corridor. That's okay. Like I mentioned, we've got the complete set of plans that is going to make available to you. And again, we can continue to field any questions on that, and we'll send news if the project's awarded. So that's all I've got. But any questions the commission has for me, I'd be happy to field.
Thank you for that very thorough, comprehensive, and we appreciate that. I know a lot of work went into that, so we appreciate it. And also thank everyone for holding their questions, because I know I saw some scribbling and going around. I know everybody's got some questions. So to manage the time, what we'll do is I will start off and just ask do we have any questions? Okay, so we'll go with Commissioner Tombach. Go ahead, sir.
I have several questions. What was that Assembly Bill BA?
AB 43.
8043?
Yeah, Assembly Bill 43. And then there was a piece of follow-on legislation that sort of eased implementation. The number is escaping right now. It's like 10. We can look it up, yeah.
It's similar.
It basically kind of answered some questions that were left open in the original bill.
Okay, and again, that allows cities, municipalities to reduce the speed without having to go through major studies?
Well, you would still do an engineering study, but typically the way that works is it requires you, I'm going to devolve in the weeds for a second here. The way that traditional speed limits are set is it tends over time to raise speed limits because people tend to not drive the speed limit. They tend to drive a little bit faster. What this allows cities to do is designate specific corridors as sort of safety corridors or commercial corridors or kind of high-risk corridors. If there's large numbers of residential populations, I think there's specific land uses that are called out as well. Or you can use the basis of safety, right? High numbers of collisions. You can't do it to every street in the city, but you can designate a corridor or a stretch of corridor as one that's of particular concern, and you can lower those speed limits incrementally, but 5 miles per hour at a time. And the legislation doesn't take effect until 2024, but a lot of cities are starting to get a leg up and just sort of doing the preparation work so that come January 1st, those speed limits can drop immediately. You can start putting signs up and enforcing that lower speed limit. I think there's a little bit of a adjustment period where you maybe can't start writing speeding citations right away, but it's relatively short, and you can sort of enforce speeds on those new designated streets.
Okay. The other question I had was, how do you calculate the benefit cost ratio? If it's something obvious that it may cause a death or a slight injury, how do you actually calculate the benefit?
So the benefit is what you look at is you look at the number of collisions and the severity. So a collision where someone is killed on the roadway, it gets a monetized value. It's a set of parameters that USDOT, the National Transportation Department, sets. The state can adjust it to something that they think is sort of in line with that number. And so a fatal collision is worth, I hate to use that word, but approximately $2.1 million in benefit if you implement something that because you need to be able to compare it to the cost of a project. So you need to put it into dollars.
And so how do you calculate or interpret that to our city streets?
So what would happen with the benefit cost ratio, or BCR, is that if you've got, say, one fatal collision that happened when a pedestrian was crossing the street, for example. So let's just use round numbers, $2 million in sort of benefit that would be reduced. If the city was to install, say, like an enhanced crossing, and it costs them about $20,000 for all the signs, infrastructure, lights, painting, labor, design, all in, you would get a 100-to-1 benefit cost ratio right there. I think I'm doing my math in my head right. I'm dropping zeros. So you would get a BCR of 100-to-1. So for every dollar you spent, you would get a benefit reduction, a collision value reduction of $100. So it's just a way to kind of take that project cost and compare it to a monetized value of someone being killed or injured, or in some cases just a property damage collision. Those have a monetized value about $14,000.
So that's based on historical fact or
The
historical
monetized value.
Yeah. Well, how do you calculate, say, on Kendall, that how much money we're going to get, or how do you estimate the amount of deaths that we're going to have?
Yeah. So it's not a predictive measure. It's just a way of saying these are the types of collisions that have happened, the severities, and it's really part of the highway safety improvement process, that program we applied for. They sort of established those metrics. The program's been around for a long time, and so it's an easy benchmark that's very consistently used across the state. So it's one that is good to apply, even if it's not going after highway safety improvement dollars. It's still a recognized way to sort of determine the priority of a project, and in the case of the grant programs, to rank projects and award them funding.
Okay.
Yeah, but not predictive in any way.
Okay. And a real quick 10-second comment. You gave a lot of good statistics that I could not keep up with.
Sorry.
And it would be really nice to kind of have some of those statistics, the percentages embedded into the PowerPoint here, maybe it's a sidebar, so we don't have to write as much.
No problem. And a lot of it is in the report. There's specifically a technical collision analysis section that has probably more numbers than you'd want to look at, but it really breaks those numbers down into very specific categories as well. We try to include that because it's helpful if you're reporting out to another agency or to elected officials.
Thank you. Commissioner Kelly, did you?
Yes, I have a question. This is all nice and fancy and something to put out for the public and for the city council to put forward. Now I know it's going to probably be a guesstimate, when they get the money, and how long is it going to take to implement this to make a difference in the city for the citizens?
I want to defer to Azam on that, I think is the safe bet. I have my own thoughts about the funding process in California, but
I know it's going to be estimated.
you know.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Usually they give us 7 years
So
from the time we apply for the grant application
Uh-huh.
by the time it gets implemented.
Okay,
So we have to go through a step process, and basically, once we get the grant, and currently we have one in process, we're upgrading the signal heads throughout the city. I'm sure you've seen the yellow tape that we have. That's one of the grant projects that we got that 2 years ago. So, but from design to construction usually takes about a year and a half to 2 years.
Okay.
And then I have a year to complete that project. So that project will be completed within, I would say, maybe 3 years from the day or the project was awarded, the grant was awarded to the city.
okay. And then how do you know that what you're doing is working out there? Do you have any statistics on that? Or
That's an
any-
excellent question. The state will come back
Okay,
after the award of the grant, after you implement it,
Okay.
and they ask you to provide to them collision comparison. From the day that you apply for the grant to the day that you implemented this, how much you reduce the collisions.
okay, thank you. That
Okay.
answers my question.
Yeah.
That's it?
Mhm.
Commissioner Walters, did you have any questions? All right. You made several references, this is Commissioner Taylor, you made several references to the DUI stats and whatnot. And I was just curious because you said something about the programs that have been in place. And I was just wondering, can you give an example of what those programs, what programs,
So they're
what
listed.
they look like?
They're listed in very small
Okay.
font on my sheet, but a lot of them are outreach to, and I think maybe the police department could probably speak to this a little bit better since they're the ones implementing it. But there's youth outreach, there's PSA
Okay.
programs. I think there are some programs that involve working with bar owners and like liquor store and market owners to make sure they're selling liquor safely.
Sure.
Do you want me to?
So
I don't
the
wanna-
vast majority of them, especially via the OTS grant, which you referred to multiple times, DUI checkpoints, DUI patrols, basically where we'll send out 7, 8 cars, and their only focus is to try to locate DUI suspects, either leaving bars or coming out of liquor stores or whatnot. So the traffic unit oversees that, and weekly they're running different operations, and we've been fortunate enough to, I believe every year that we apply for the OTS grants, we receive several of them. There's some that we do for like bicycle safety enforcement. You may see some for crosswalk enforcement, where you'll see motorcycle officers sitting by, watching to see folks crossing through the intersection. You might have even read about some of those in the various newspapers. So again, we've been fortunate enough to receive that grant. It seems like every year that we apply for the OTS grant.
And I take it that's just specific to alcohol, not any other substance?
There's different ones. It's under the influence, essentially just alcohol, but there's any type of under the influence. So marijuana, prescription meds, control. Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
One thing we've seen too on the funding side is that as cannabis legalization kind of continues to become legal across the country, the federal government is sort of expanding the pot of money to make available to that. It was kind of seen as ancillary to DUI, but it's starting to become its own funding source. I think once they start taxing it at a federal level, they're already taxing it at a state level, that will establish a revenue stream to kind of go back into enforcement and safety.
Okay.
That's the kind of what we think is going to be on the horizon. What happens nationally, though, is
Right.
up to us.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Elliott, did you?
I have several.
Saw you scribbling.
What is KSI?
Killed or severely injured.
Ah.
Yeah, and that's the two sort of highest severity categories of collision.
Okay. And some cities synchronize their signal lights. And I'm wondering, is that something considerable? Specifically, I was thinking of Baseline and the 215. I know that intersection all too well. And so all the traffic from the freeway backs up on that bridge. And so folks who are in a hurry run the light all the time. And so I'm wondering, University is another good monster, because you have this light green and this one red, and so the cars are backed up everywhere. So somebody's shooting down the side of the street or whatever. So I know in Los Angeles, and certainly in some areas, the lights synchronize, and I'm wondering, is that something? Is that effective, or is that something you're factoring in?
Not on the local roadway safety plan,
Okay.
Because most of these locations we analyze are within the city jurisdiction.
Correct.
But to respond to your question accurately, we work closely with Caltrans in synchronizing the signals. Keep in mind, the only signals we have is at the on and off ramp, northbound, southbound, 215 baseline. The rest of them are the city. So we have to make sure that we have a coordinated cycle between the city signals and the Caltrans signals. If you have a 90-second cycle at the city intersections and you have a 100-second cycle at the Caltrans ramps, it's not going to work.
Okay, that's interesting.
Most of this is a synchronization of the signals have to be uniform. So when we do 90-second cycle, it has to be across the board, number
Right.
one. Number two, these signals, what they do is they drift. So they have to be either on interconnect system, so all of them are talking at the same time,
Yeah.
or a GPS system. Unfortunately, the Caltrans signal, they have their own system. They run on a GPS time clock. Some of the signals we have, they're on time-based coordination. That means there's no GPS clock and they're not interconnected to the traffic management center. So it's a challenge. Once in a while we get the request, like Palm. Number one issue I have in the city is Palm and the 15.
Absolutely.
Coming down that hill
Yes.
every morning.
Right.
You know, it's a challenge because, first of all, you don't have capacity under the bridge. You need turning lanes, you don't have that. And you have only, I think, one or two lanes going eastbound or northbound and southbound.
Right.
And with all the trucks, with all the traffic, with all the development and GFR homes developing in that area, and with all the traffic on
That's
Palm,
a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, yes.
Yeah, I forgot that one.
Yeah. University, we're going to solve it. Next year, we're going to implement the second diamond diversion ramp at the state of California. It's called the DDI. I'm not sure if you know what that is, but we can do a separate presentation. I think SBCTA came and did a presentation to City Council. Is it Daniel in June, July? So hopefully that design, that layout will resolve the issues that we have for Cal State University for the students coming in and out of campus at that location.
And another one where I think synchronization would make some sense is that ingress and egress coming out of San Manuel, coming off onto Highland. You mentioned, your report mentions Highland at Rockford or Eucalyptus.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
and that's another bunch up. You know, that traffic either going in or out from the freeway up or back. And then, so you have a green light right there by Denny's, where you come off the freeway, and you have a red light at Arden.
Arden is a state-controlled intersection.
Okay.
That's why.
Okay.
That's why. And then Ryan, he's my timing expert.
Okay.
He usually does synchronized signals
Okay.
and make sure any location you have, just forward it to us, and we'll be helpful. We'll help you to synchronize the signals and find out. That's the only way. We have 300 signals throughout the city. It's the I think largest in San Bernardino County, if I'm not mistaken. Number of signals.
And Caltrans doesn't talk to the jurisdictions to try to make things. I mean, you guys don't, you know.
We do. I mean, but it is. They do their best to accommodate our
Okay.
request. If it comes in from city council
Right.
or from management, we look at that and we meet them out in the field, try to synchronize signals
Okay.
along, all the locations that crosses the 215 freeway.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will add one more note about synchronization, is that it really only tends to work if people are near the speed limit or below it. So if someone's going 20 over the speed limit, it has no effectiveness at all.
Which leads me to my next question. My next question is for PD. looking at this data, is PD's enforcement data-driven or sporadic?
So typically it is data-driven, but I would have to confirm with the traffic unit to find out exactly what data they use to determine what areas they're going to enforce.
Because I hear you saying that this, and we've actually heard it for several months, especially we're talking about the 27th or 28th Street corridor, where they're going to put up no left turn signs and all that, and they were saying, it only works if we have an enforcement mechanism. And so I'm looking at these several categories of collisions and what they're relative to, and I'm wondering if this consultant is able to essentially develop a roadway safety plan and put them into these 5 categories. Are you likewise able to adjust enforcement into these categories that creates a fuller picture at the end of the day? Kind of like this was brought to us, and this is what we did to complement what they did, and that's kind of my question.
No, I get what you're saying. I'm sure that's possible. I think a lot of the data that's already listed, it sounds like they were already in collaboration with our traffic unit to get some of the data that they received. So I can double check and report back to find out exactly where we're at with this, and see if we can't get something so we can implement some of these strategies based on the report.
All right, and then I'm going to come back to you because I understand there's a new jaywalking law, or no jaywalking
law.
that people can jaywalk. Is that fair to say?
Essentially.
Essentially. So California passed a law that said you don't need a sidewalk, just walk. Okay. Are the placement of checkpoints likewise distributed using some similar data? Or maybe a way to say is could I ask you to check into it?
My apologies. Just the placement of the checkpoints?
Yes.
Yes.
So where they enumerated DUIs and the high density of them, I'm wondering, again, data-driven responses is kind of what I'm asking about. So the last one I had was
Just wanted to follow up on that question really quickly to understand that PD is working with a slightly different set of data. What our data shows is where people who have already been in a collision.
Correct.
Where that occurred.
Correct.
Citation data is a little bit different. It's where people maybe have been cited for it, but they haven't crashed into something yet.
Correct.
And that could paint a different.
Yeah, what I'm looking for though, specifically, and the question I'm asking is, if you're going to address these identified spots, places, they've been identified because of TCs, and again, I'm looking straight at your data the way you printed it. So, if there's a high density of, I would assume, it's an assumption, and I want to ask PD to give up their, what is it, something in methods, but I would assume that if the police department started noticing a high degree of gang activity, hypothetically, a growing, something going on gang related in a certain pocket, that their management would probably start to tailor some responses because they see this thing starting to build. That's an assumption. In this case, this is data of what has happened, and there is, particularly in the DUI section and the unsafe speed sections, there are higher density pockets of collisions, not sites, that have happened. And so to that end, again, that's what I was asking, is PD looking likewise at this data? I mean, it would be great if we had 500-600 police officers, and I know we don't. But that means, like everything, you've got to kind of make your resources work. So to that end, I was simply asking, and you're saying you'll get back, is whether it also is looking at, maybe there's 8 checkpoints throughout the city in a year, but maybe hypothetically, you're seeing more problems on, I'll pick a street, Del Rosa and Highland. Maybe there should be 3 there, and the other 5 somewhere else. That's kind of
I get you.
what I'm asking. So that whatever plans you put in place, we get a kind of a really clear picture of it. Is it working? The last part of that was on your page where you enumerated the streets. The page is called the Benefit Cost Ratio Analysis. Highland Eucalyptus, 5th and Victoria, Meridian and Rialto, certainly those 3 that I know of, border, and in some cases split jurisdictions. Meridian and Rialto, half is ours and half is Rialto's. I'm wondering, is the city, specifically Mr. Hernandez, are you guys able to talk to the other jurisdictions? Like up there we have county. At Eucalyptus, half of the street is county and half the street is city. Are you able to talk to the other jurisdictions and kind of get them to jump in here and cut a check too?
So we've been approached and we have approached.
Okay.
But, there is communication, especially if it's a shared intersection.
Right.
Because we don't want to do a partial improvement. So there's been instances where the county or the city of Rialto has contacted us, which we just pay our share of that improvement. So whoever the lead agency is will take on the responsibility for delivering the projects, and then they'll just ask for a share, and we'll either enter into an agreement or something to that effect.
So generally, there's been good relationships with the other jurisdictions sharing costs.
Yes.
Okay, that was it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Commissioner Guzman.
Oh, gosh, yes, thank you.
You thought I was back. No, I'm just kidding.
No, wait till just wait. Very, very interesting. As you know, we live on these. I'll go straight to the point. The school collisions are of high interest to me because some of the sites that you mentioned, some of the locations are very well known to me. And so you spoke about the Olive Street drop-off for Eniel Roberts School. That is of high interest to me and also to this commission because chicanes were installed right next to what was Waterman Gardens. Traffic collisions were constant. I live there, by the way. Also, some other locations, Baseline coming off the 215, there are 2 schools right in that area. About 30 years ago, their buildings used to face Baseline, and I'm sure that caused a lot of accidents. And unfortunately, I'm just guessing, kids. The buildings were rebuilt back away from Baseline. But anyway, the point is that I still know that those are high danger school sites. And I was wondering where we can get some fine details. You spoke of anecdotal evidence, as well as some other conversations, dialogues you've had with the school district, these particular sites, and so forth and so on. I'm highly interested on the projects that you mentioned, especially around school collisions. Can you say just generally a little more about those?
The collisions or the projects?
In the collisions, please.
The collisions.
Yes,
Collisions.
yes.
So one of the good things, like I said, is that we took a look at the collisions at a couple of different levels, just what's near a school, what involved kids. A lot of this was what's happening on weekdays versus weekends, right? Because school days, you have different patterns of traffic, and you also have kids in school versus kids not in school. So in looking at the collisions across the city, like I said, we did see fairly small numbers of collisions involving kids under 18, or just anyone under 18, and then anyone walking or biking. And those are kind of the dominant modes for kids once they get out of the car, if they're not already walking or biking to school. So for those specific sites, we would probably have to go into that data set we developed and look at sort of some specific things that happened for each collision. There's a very robust set of data around each collision, not just where it happened, the date, the time, the age of folks, but the model of car that was being driven. Was the person walking or biking? What direction were they traveling in? What movement were they making right before they were they making a left turn, a U-turn? Were they going straight? Were they coming out of the driveway? So there is a wealth of information, and one of the recommendations we made was to develop and maintain safe routes to school plans. And one of the aspects of that is you do a really deep dive into specific sites, right? And you pick those sites by looking at a document, a plan like this, and saying, okay, we've got these 8, 10 schools that have the highest concentrations of collisions. Those are our priority schools for safe routes to school planning. So again, this is showing like that sort of big picture lens, and then we do have some specific projects we developed. Oh, that's okay. But then, in that safe routes to school planning, you look at sort of very specific collision details. You look at the very specific infrastructure that's in place for each of those locations and around those school sites. Access to schools is really important. You can't just put something in near a driveway because that's the driveway where the buses all pull in and pull out of, right? You need wide turning radiuses, clear sight lines. Sometimes you need even additional crossing infrastructure. So you do a sort of more detailed study on the specific sites, I would say, to really figure out in a nuanced way what's needed at each school. Because something that I might recommend as a traffic and transportation consultant might not be compatible with the city's pickup and drop-off plan or their, the way that they use their gates at the school, right? They may have a main gate, but most of the kids leave from the side or out the back, and so you need to know a lot of that detail before making, really specific recommendations at a school site. So.
Thanks. Is there a place where we can get more? Will you come back?
Okay, yeah, we're still here. We're not,
Okay.
Noah's not going anywhere. I don't think we're scoped for a safe routes to school plan or anything like that. But I can let Azam talk about
Let me
that.
talk about that. Once you accept the local roadway safety plan here tonight, their scope is almost complete. The segment that is left is the city council presentation. Once we go to city council for the presentation and acceptance of the resolution, then the scope is complete. But what we can do is we have most of the documentations that KOA presented. We can extract the data that you're requesting, and then in the future what we can do is develop safe route to school applications, grant applications, in addressing the issues that resulted in these collisions. We can. That's why they provided all the GIS data base for the collisions throughout the city. There's a lot of them. It's a huge database. So that's the approach we probably would have to take.
Excellent, excellent. Safe routes to school funding, okay.
Yeah, it's separate. It's completely separate. What Jonathan talked about tonight, which is the HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Plan, is the safe route to school is completely separate application process that applies specifically for the schools. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, that's very valuable, yes.
Okay, commissioners.
So I live in Commissioner Carrillo. So I live in the vicinity of the new TAD building, and I know that they did some traffic studies, but it's come to my attention through the neighbors that we're getting a lot of donuts spinning in the middle of the thing. But here's the thing, though, it's not close to any residences. So the incidence of disturbance is more late at night, and nobody's really impacted, but the potential for something to go really wrong is there. In addition to that, during the daytime, we're beginning to get not related to the TAD building, but because of the way that the traffic flows Miramonte Drive into Little Mountain Road, people trying to go across with the high rate of speed, people coming down from Little Mountain Drive. How do we address that? Does it come up automatically, or is it something that we need to initiate? How does that come forth? I mean, you know, I had a couple of people ask me, what do I do? And quite frankly, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I could call PD, but I think everybody calls PD. I wanted to bring it up here, and the question is open to the commissioners as well, too, because I'm sure everybody has these areas, but that newly designed, I'm telling you, there couldn't be a more perfect place to do some kind of, those kind of things, because it's a nice S-turn with a lot of room to get high speed, and if they lose control, they don't really cause any damage. They just, you hear it and it stops and they go back. So there's that. The other thing is, because I live close to a school, living in a city like San Bernardino, where, you know, my home was built in 1949, a lot of the trees were put on the corners of the streets. And there's one in particular that's on the corner of our street where there's a telephone pole, and right behind the telephone pole is a bougainvillea bush. And all the neighbors are just waiting for one of these days when, you know, the chances, this is directly across from the playground. Somebody might, you know, could hit a kid very, very easily on that. And it's funny, I was going to bring that up, but I got a text, Mountain View and 40th Street. There looks to be a hedge that might have been put in by the city. Forgive me, I haven't checked it out. Usually I would check it out before I bring it up. But those kind of things where they're landscaping, that kind of stuff, is this included in your presentation on what to do to keep the public safe?
So I'll talk about the first item, so sort of people doing donuts in the middle of the street, you know, losing control, that kind of thing. I think, like you noted, especially when there's no residents around to note that it's an issue, it kind of just builds up and continues. So one of the things that I've seen that's been effective, and I live in Long Beach, and we have quite a bit of that as well, and quite a bit of that sort of near where I am. I'm not too far from downtown. What I've seen very, very effective in preventing that from happening at a specific location, and this is solely through engineering. This is not through programming, enforcement, outreach, anything like that, but just from the engineering perspective. You can put a mini roundabout in the middle of the street. So this is something that's very small. This is not like a giant traffic circle, but something small. That's one way, right? You basically take out the middle of that intersection. It promotes traffic calming, so people can't really get up to speed. And you can still, you know, make plenty. You can make a left turn, you can make a right turn, you can make a U-turn through a mini traffic circle. A lot of that is dependent on what's in place at that location, and sort of what the physical constraints are. You can't just drop them in anywhere. They do need to be concrete. They can't be like, you know, plastic bollards or anything like that. So that's one thing I've seen be effective. The other thing is what's like a corner bulb out or a curb bulb out. So you sort of project the curb a little bit further out, you know, sort of from where the two sidewalks meet each other. So that shortens the crossing distance. Cars need to be a little more careful when they're going around that. But again, the infrastructure in place matters. That can cause conflicts with stormwater. You need to have enough room in the intersection. If there's no parking lane present, it's really difficult to do without getting in the way of right-turning vehicles. So those are two measures that are, you know, hardscape infrastructure that can address that. That being said, you can't just put them everywhere. You know, they're not inexpensive. They're not millions of dollars, but they're not cheap either. So that would be one of those things too, where you sort of assess a corridor where you've got high speeds, maybe pedestrian collisions occurring, turning movement conflicts occurring, and then you also have these instances of, you know, people doing donuts or just not driving safely in the intersections, and you could put a series of mini traffic circles in, and that would sort of calm the entire corridor. You don't have to do things like remove stop signs or anything like that. I would encourage you, this is my own local knowledge, in Long Beach, look up 6th Street in Long Beach. I lived there before and after those were implemented. 6th Street from Junipero to all the way to PCH almost. And that used to be a bypass for a major arterial. I mean, I know that's a problem here in San Bernardino too, that people use side streets instead of going down an arterial because there's a lot of traffic. So something like that is possible, and it can be fairly effective. I mean, I saw the traffic and the collisions change quite a bit. People complain. Not everybody likes them, so I think you need to be prepared for backlash. But one of the things you can do as an individual, I think, is just support it. Say, look, we know this is a good idea. The data backs it up. The engineering backs it up. Let's give it a chance.
Now, is it going to be more complicated because all of that has been recently redesigned, so it isn't an existing that's been there for a long period of time.
That does
The
complicate
building
it,
is
yes.
within the last year and a half, and the road design, I'm going to say, was probably maybe 4 years. Captain Carrington, are you familiar with that wide area, and are you getting the complaints of people doing the roadies for Little Mountain and Miramonte come together? There's that S curve, and I'm telling you, they can't come to that, and especially when the traffic's not there. And you can tell it's such a high rate of speed. I mean, it's just going to be pretty soon before we get a rollover there.
There's multiple locations in the city that we're starting to experience that. There was a pretty aggressive one about a week and a half ago at 16th and Mount Vernon. That lasted for a significant amount of time. We get them on Cajon Boulevard up near the Cimarron Ranch area. So unfortunately, the way they organize those things is really hard to try to stay on top of it. All we can do is be reactive when they actually get out there.
I almost don't see how PD could endless, because not only that, your visibility is so obvious that people there aren't going to do it with you there. You'd have to be kind of hidden to do it. But how would we initiate some kind of start at least to an investigation to see if it would be worth it? Because it is starting to increase. We just had another accident over the weekend.
We do have different methods that we use to try to combat. I'm not going to say exactly what they are because certain things we need to investigate, tools we need to keep to ourselves. But there are methods that we have to try to help combat some of it.
So maybe just work with PD. I mean,
exactly. I think that area should be Lieutenant Castro's area.
All right.
well, he didn't address the vegetation.
Vegetation. So, and that particular one, we didn't look at the existing landscaping. We would literally have to walk every street in the city, and I don't think we had the budget at the time for that. You can do sort of systemic review of sightlines, kind of using tree pattern data, things like that. But it's not something that's easy to do. You really need to be boots on the ground. Typically, that's addressed, with like a specific engineering study or a corridor study, where you're really zoomed in on one location or maybe one corridor. But it's not impossible to do. So it takes a little bit more sort of detailed work. And this was really.
Where would that go to? Building and safety?
No, you can to engineering. You can start with us and then we'll.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Now, Commissioner.
No, I'm good.
But we forgot one thing.
Oh, who did he forget?
Happy Law Enforcement Day.
Oh.
We should have that up at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you for your services. We really appreciate you, all the officers in the department, hard work that you do.
All right, Commissioner Cervantes.
No, I said meeting was over.
Oh.
No questions, you've answered them all.
All right. Okay, so thank you all for your input. We're going to go ahead. Number 3, accept local roadway safety plan. The recommendation is to consider staff report, receive public input, and recommend that the mayor and city council adopt a resolution accepting the local roadway safety plan. Do I have a motion?
Tombach.
Commissioner Tombach, do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Guzman, all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. All right, excellent. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we have the announcements.
So, Madam Chair, for the record, we took item 2 and 3 together.
Okay. All right, so what is that? Public safety. Number 5 for the.
Yeah. No, I just meant,
Oh, okay.
we were on
yes.
item 2.
Correct,
and
correct.
You
I
took
got you.
item 2 and 3 together.
Correct, okay. So number 5, Public Safety, Human Relations Commission announcements and reports. We'll start with, we'll start from this end, so we start from the other end. Commissioner Cervantes, do you have any?
Reports in our area. Mine? No reports this month.
All right. Commissioner Carrillo?
Addressed during the meeting. Thank you.
you. Commissioner Guzman?
No reports.
All right. Commissioner Elliott?
I was asked, since you're 6th Ward, I was asked, Madam Chairman, is there a Black History Parade this year?
I will have to follow up with, oh, there is.
There
Okay,
is?
Okay, okay, the details of that.
Do we have some information?
It's on the 16th.
Yes, it's 16.
Next Monday.
Okay, and where to where?
I know it ends in front of Royal High School. I don't remember
Right.
where it starts.
Correct.
Do you know where it starts, Scott? Okay. Yeah, I've been asked, because there wasn't very much outreach about it.
I have the
Mount Vernon?
I'll give you one second.
Okay.
Traffic control.
Okay, and then, Madam Chairman, thank you, I wasn't being disrespectful to decline your nomination, except I'm an at-large appointed by the mayor, and our terms expired officially last month, and we have a new mayor, and my understanding is that she's reviewing applications, so because that's not hardened yet, that's why I didn't want to do anything.
I understand.
And I'm just waiting on this for the MLK parade, because that's what I've been asked about.
Baseline and MCD.
Baseline?
Baseline and Medical Center.
Correct.
And goes to Arroyo.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and that's next Monday. What time? Hernandez?
In the morning. I think it's
9 o'clock,
12.
8 o'clock?
Time?
I think it's 12.
Whenever they get there?
Yeah, it's
When you hear the music.
When you hear the music.
It's at 12 initially. They had said 1.
Yes.
And they're staging at 11.
Okay.
Correct.
So the parade actually is noon.
This is 12 to 2.
12 to 2. Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much.
Commissioner Walters, do you have any announcements or?
No.
All right.
No.
Okay. Commissioner Kelly?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to remind everybody the point in time count for the homeless
Yes.
is going to be January 26th at 6 a.m. at San Manuel Stadium. You can sign up on the city website to participate. And from what I understand, the point in time count helps with the monies brought in to help the less fortunate within the city.
All right. Excellent. Is that it? All right. Commissioner Kalmbach?
No. Just reminding everyone, Fire Department PD, that with the rains coming in, American Red Cross is on standby to open up shelters. To open up a shelter, all you have to do is call Red Cross, or what is it, 800 Red Cross, or give me a call and I can talk to the supervisors if you need a shelter open in this area for any reason. But they do have me on standby for the shelters in Yucaipa due to the fires that they had there before. Next thing I have on my list here is for Public Works. I've been asking for years and years and years for somebody to kind of give me a definitive answer. The street that I live on, 44th Street, is in severe need of repair. It hasn't been repaired probably in about 70 years. The problem is that this foundation is cement, and they just don't want to put a slurry on it. They don't want to make it look pretty because it'll just kind of go to waste. All the streets around me have been repaired and fixed, but my street hasn't. We actually, the neighbors took it upon themselves about 4 years ago to put did a petition that all the neighbors signed and submitted the petition to, I believe, the city council, and I think they just kind of give it a thumbs down. They didn't pay attention to it, or something happened. When I brought it to the attention of previous directors, they just kind of PR'd me like the rest of the public and didn't really give me a direct answer. Oh, we'll get to it sometime. It's the answer, but get to it sometimes is not acceptable. We're talking about streets that have been not worked on for years. And so I'd like somebody to kind of review that again. I'm also having issues with Burtech in terms of the trash pickup. I'll get together with, you right, leader? Correct? Yeah. But I just wanted to put that down on the report here. Also, I think on October 10th, I put down that we put on the agenda to look into the emergency operations manual, or to create an emergency operations manual for the city council, including the mayor, in terms of what to do during an emergency. What is their role during the emergency? I'm thinking back on several emergencies that we've had in the past. They were just kind of running around with their heads cut off. They didn't know. The mayor was, one of the mayors that I worked with was actually afraid to even approach a major crime scene, the shooting that we had, and they didn't know what to do. Same thing with a couple council people. They didn't know what to do. We need a specific written protocol for them so that they know what their role and responsibilities are during a crisis. We do have in the city a operations manual for emergency disasters for the PD and fire department, or I'm sure fire department has their own, but we don't have anything that distinguishes the exact role for the mayor and council. And so that's what I kind of like to focus on, not just the emergency operations plan, but something specifically for the mayor and council, so that they don't get confused, they don't go over their limits or their duties. Sir.
So I can address that from the police department side. I can't tell them what they can and can't do. I can tell them that they can't come into the crime scene and interfere with any of the inner workings of the crime scene. And I'm sure fire has some similar protocols as far as what they can and can't do. But I can't tell them, you can go over here and say this, or you're to go here and say that. That's something that has to come from City Hall. That's not anything that the police department can address, if that makes sense.
And that's exactly why we need to look into this for the city council. It's not, has nothing to do with the police department, nothing to do with the fire department or public works, but it's just for the city council. It's just an operations plan. They have no idea what to do. There's nothing written. You know, it's kind of like a situation for us. You know, we don't have a specific outline, the do's and don'ts. You know, not yet anyway. Or we didn't. There might be something in the works. But so I brought that up, and nothing's been brought up in terms of putting it on the agenda, just to get something started. So I brought that up specifically October 10th, and nothing has appeared on the agenda. I don't know why. You know, maybe the plan didn't get liked, but I would like it addressed. Calendar of events, I think that's on the agenda, but I thought it would be put in today.
I didn't have time to do the research and find who's going to take care of that matter, so I didn't put it on the agenda. And none of the items that were voted on, it's supposed to be for a future agenda, not necessarily the next month's agenda. And with the holidays, you know, I didn't have time to research to see, okay, who's going to take the lead on this? Who am I going to contact to see, you know, who can come in and address this to the commission?
All right. Well, this should be an educational thing for the rest of the people on the council, that when we make an agenda item and we put it before our secretary to write it down for the next agenda, it may not get put on.
No.
You know, obviously.
It's just like with council, it's for a future agenda, not for next month's agenda.
Well, how do we assure that, if I want it on the next agenda, how do I make sure that it gets on the next agenda?
I have, like, you know, other duties. So I need to have the time.
I
to be
know,
able
but
to
that's
do the
not
research.
our problem here
So,
at the council.
Commissioner Tombach, I'm going to have Commissioner Elliott speak.
Well, no, I can speak to the issue of the emergency plan because I did do a memo to the city manager expressing the desires of the commission that night. So I did do that the next month up to the city manager. And I was waiting for, so what would, as I understood it, it's been an education being chairman, but as I understood it, once the item goes, particularly if it's outside of our purview, then staff has to do whatever they do and create a staff report and the research and all that, so that by the time they come back to us, like came tonight, we had all this, and likewise with 28th Street. By the time they came back to us, they had the work, and so normally the education I was given was that once we request an item that requires staff time, then they have to prepare a staff report, blah, 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 all that stuff to come back with a presentation. And at the point that staff gets whatever they get back to Susie, is what I was told, at that point, then the item is ready to come on the agenda. But until that happened, which is why I forwarded your request, and there was a consensus of the commission, so I did that to the city manager, requesting, saying we're interested in something like that, and they did acknowledge receipt of the request.
No.
And I did that the next month.
Thank you. So would there be a way to place on the written agendas here a tracking system? This topic has been tabled till future use, just so that it doesn't get lost?
Well, if something gets tabled, then you guys will do it. But as far as an item that gets placed on the agenda for a future agenda, what I'll do is I will look at it and see who would be the most appropriate person to discuss this matter or to bring before the commission to talk to you guys about the matter. With last month, the holidays, and then I was on vacation as well, so I just didn't have the time to look at the 3 items and research and see who. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's like, I need to make some calls, I need to call some people, I need to find out who's going to address this. And I've been on the phone with somebody and said, no, try them. No, not us, try them.
Well, can you see my concern is that just having a little note here saying, just to be considered in the future, and just keep a running list until we get to it. Just looking from one agenda to the other, it just looks like I was just ignored. I understand your point.
It's not that.
I know it's not. You explained it and I understand it. But if we do have it written on here to be considered in the future so that I don't bring it up again.
I guess that can be done.
I mean, we could, Susie, if I can, so we could talk to the city, because the city clerk does this for the city council.
Correct.
So we can ask what system they have to catalog or to.
Yeah, so what I do is I tickle it for myself on my calendar so that I can, whatever is approved for a future agenda, then I go to my calendar at work and I'll tickle it. And so come, the next day or within the next couple working days, I will reach out and to whoever is the most appropriate department and ask them about it.
Through the chair.
Commissioner Elliott.
I think what Commissioner Tombach is asking for, or at least on those lines, is something that you already have. Because when I was the chair, I would ask what items are on future agenda. Do you have the backup done yet? And you would do something and say, well, there's this, and this will be ready next week. And this, I think that's what he's asking. Is there, and I did talk to the city clerk, and they pretty much do the same thing. essentially, the answer to the question is everything that we put on an agenda for, or we ask to be considered for a future agenda, you do keep a log of that. And then back to where, again, it's the education I was given, was that then if it requires outsiders or more staff time or whatever, and they have to do a staff report and all that and package it up so it's presentable, meets with all the requirements. At that point, my experience has been, you've told me, okay, I have everything and this item can go forward.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I usually have a trail of emails to who I've emailed, who I've asked
No, I get
about
it.
this. And
So the answer to the question is she does keep a tally in her system of all items that we consider for a future agenda.
Yeah.
And that was my experience.
Right. And so what I'm asking then is maybe a copy of that tally to be attached to our agenda so that we know that we're not missing something. So
Well, I
that
just
we're-
kind of follow the format that the clerk's office does with the agenda, and they don't show like a section on the agenda like that. So I've never, done that. I just follow the same format that the clerk's office does. And when everything comes together and it's ready, then it'll get placed on the agenda. I try to do it like the very next day, the very next month, but sometimes that's just not possible, which was the case with December.
No, and it's not that you're doing anything wrong or anything like that. It's just that when I come in and I look at this and I go, what happened to the topic I spoke to 2 months ago? What's the status? I don't have a status for it. And I don't know where it's at, so.
Like the item that you referred to about the.
Well, that was one of them that I was able to just go back a couple of months,
Because, I mean, I've reached out to you as well for items that you've wanted on the agenda, and I've communicated with you. I have emails. So I don't know what exactly you're referring to, because.
All I'm asking is just if we can have it on paper written here,
Like this item is still pending?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I guess we.
Yeah, it's just something seeing the status of past agenda items or
Pending items.
pending items, yes. Just so that they don't get lost and you know that they're still
And they're
there.
not lost. I have the,
So-
I have them taken.
I know, but from my end, they look like they're lost.
So how about doing it, so how about every 6 months we have something like that, pending, showing pending?
Oh, gosh, I
No.
don't wait that long.
No?
6 months, I don't wait that long. I try to
So-
get it the next month, and if it doesn't go
No, what
to
she's
the
saying
following
is-
month, then I will do it the.
Susie, what she's saying is, how about twice a year, you report to the commission if there are items still pending or not.
I see.
That's all.
Okay.
Those are items that we're still waiting on, or we don't have any pending items that haven't been addressed.
Okay, I see.
So as item 6, or whatever number it is in terms of item 6, we can maybe just include a backlog, basically whatever's pending. Even if it's just what it's going to be the next meeting, but we can potentially just create a when it was approved the at what commission meeting,
Right.
and that way it's just cataloged, so whatever is backlogged. That's like just as an attachment. It's just maybe a real quick table.
Commissioner
So anything
Cervantes?
recorded on our meetings, aren't those supposed to be in our minutes?
They are.
Okay, so then if we're discussing it, then we can't just put in our minutes that this was brought up and we're going to, you know what I mean? So then the minutes, because we're making kind of double work if anything's on recording until it stops is recorded and on the meeting. So that's the minutes for. So maybe we're just, we're going to ask for double work from Susie because like she said, she has other things she does outside. So maybe we can think about what's best for Susie and all of us as a team.
But I like as a compromise, the idea of twice a year, she just letting us know, these are items that you guys brought to me that are still pending because I'm waiting on staff, or I'm waiting on this, or I'm waiting on that. Or there are no pending items, they're clear.
Right.
We're all good. And that way, it creates the reporting mechanism he wants. It doesn't, 6 months should be well enough time to have addressed something. And at least there is a mechanism to say these still items are still holding, and this is why. or, just maybe just a simple report to say, so that and then that does get in the record. And then you know what items are, and we asked Public Works with 28th Street, we specifically put in our motion, report back in 6 months as to what you're doing. And last conversation I had, they were ordering signs. So, I mean, I think that's, if that's amenable, a compromise.
Well, 6 months, I think that's a little, I'd like to see it every month, and it would just be like a little footnote or something on this, just like a footnote. I didn't get to it, or
what I can do is create
still
a matrix
pending.
with these items that are for future agenda, and then just separately print you a sheet or attach it to the email when I send you
So I think
the agenda.
with the
Because
privilege of the chair,
otherwise, it's got to be agendized.
through the chair, I think what we have to do now is kind of like we're off in territory, off the agenda. So I think that's an item he needs to put on the agenda to be on a
That's
future
true.
agenda.
That's true.
And then let's go at it, because right now we're like all over the place, off the record, or on the record, and we haven't told the public we're talking about this.
Right.
So I think
I'll
that's probably shoot her an email to ask it to go on the future agenda to take this up, and then that way the commission can go on the record with a way to approach it.
Okay, and I think I also mentioned in the past about, I think it was in December, about having the reports that are given to us orally backed up in writing. So, well, yeah, we have that here.
So it's in
But what like with the police department, when they gave us the PowerPoint, we don't have the power. We didn't have the PowerPoint, I don't believe. It's just one sheet condensing.
That's on this agenda here, so this, what you'll do is vote on it after you're done with your, the section we're currently on.
We're on announcement.
Yes.
We're on
we are.
announcements.
So
that's
I
in the
want to
next
stay on
section, it's already in
announcements.
there.
Yeah.
So for the sake of time, we want to stay on announcements. Do you have any other announcements?
No.
Okay, so, did you have something? Number 6, items to be considered, speaking of
Boom.
future agendas.
Here we are.
All right, so Commissioner Tombach did request that reports be given to the commission should be done, request that reports given to the commission should be done in writing and bulletized for board members to use as talking points while sharing information with the public at events or meetings.
I moved the item.
Okay, Commissioner Elliott, is there a second? Commissioner Walters, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. All right. Woohoo!
Congratulations.
That's it.
And just as a reminder, if anybody
Yes.
wants an item for a future agenda, then
Okay.
you need to email me.
Right. Okay, and so.
And the
our-
chair.
Yes, the chair and,
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you, Susie, because we definitely don't want to make more work for you. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I
Just want to
appreciate
say that. All right, so.
We do appreciate you. Yeah, we all need to say that.
Yes,
We really do.
we do. All right, our next regular meeting of the Public Safety and Human Relations Commission will be held on Monday, February 13th. So get your Valentine's stuff in early. 2023 at 6 p.m. in the boardroom located at 201 Northeast Street, 3rd floor, San Bernardino, California, 92401. We are adjourned.
Supposed to be heavy rains tonight, so everybody be careful.
Yes.
Oh, and I think all of us